regulations?
Well, it's fascinating to me that three entities, the ABA, the Department of Justice, and the research agencies, all attempted to identify the number of regulations that have criminal penalties, and it is an abdication, but it's of Congress to let anybody pass a criminal law. But I don't necessarily blame Congress on this. I think it is the executive branches seeking to expand that regulatory power, and we're bloating these agencies with both the power and then no accountability.
Are there any federal agencies, are there any you name in particular that have exceeded their authority more than others that are repeat offenders?
Well, you certainly have, history has proven the IRS has gone from not a single agent carrying a firearm to now most agents carrying firearms. What is the evolution of that? The evolution is a regulatory body becoming a police body. And so we could go down the list of all the acronyms that are now moving from a regulatory body to a policing agency.
Thank you for having this hearing today. Mr. Tolman, in your testimony earlier, you mentioned a few reasons why overcriminalization is a problem. You said that the average American commits 3 felonies a day without even knowing it. What are some of those examples?
Well, the crimes on the books right now, there are many that are almost laughable. A federal crime to write a check for under $1, for example. I personally had a case in which a father and son were cold and didn't think they would make it out of the wilderness, and they cut up a park bench and burned it to stay warm, and they were charged and put in jail. So it's examples like that we could go through. Those would be the low-hanging, easy fruit for Congress to get rid of many of those laws.
My understanding is one of them is to sell malt liquor labeled as pre-war strength.
Yes.
Like, what is that about?
Yeah, the liquor business is very, very serious. You can't label it. When they were regulating it very, very tightly, then there were issues with how they would be labeled in order to not falsely advertise the contents, and you developed the bottled in bond laws, which required certain levels of alcohol. Those are still on the books.
You also spoke that the current DOJ is choosing to throw away the rule of law when they attack political enemies. Can you talk about that a little bit and give me some examples of how that's happening?
It is a more recent development. There's always been, at times, pressures. When I was U.S. Attorney, I received a phone call from a member of Congress to investigate his political opponent. And I indicated that I would not, and that if he had a claim, that he should submit it to the FBI. But I think there are good, well-meaning individuals that try to make those good decisions. But there's no question you cannot simultaneously proliferate the laws and expand the power of the prosecutor and at the same time expand immunity protection. You can't take away accountability and give them more power and not expect abuse to come as a result.
Mr. Tolman, I think it's interesting. Prosecutor abuse happens. It's happened for years. I mean, you look at, in the case of politics, you look at like Senator Ted Stevens as an example several years ago. But to me, it seems to be much more in your face than it has ever been before. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
And I think the prime example would probably be the prosecution of President Trump under federal law and, quite frankly, under state law, too.
Well, you have a prosecution going on right now that individuals on both sides of the aisle have commented on the lack of evidence, the inapplicability of the law, the attempt to manipulate the facts in order to go after. Whether you like him or don't like President Trump, it should be concerning that a prosecutor would be able to manipulate their way into the courtroom against a political opponent. You
mentioned several examples, writing a check, the pre-war stuff, pre-war liquor. How can we, or even federal agencies, start to rein in this growth, quite frankly, in the administrative state? How can we do that?
I think there are plenty of professors, advocates, groups, even like Right on Crime, the organization I'm with, or many of the other organizations here, that would be willing to lend a hand to identify the criminal statutes and the criminal regulations that are outdated and could very easily be taken off the books. And that process should begin, and it should maintain. So you should continually be doing that as we move forward. Otherwise, we're just collecting and compiling and bloating our criminal code.
In charge every single citizen in there with some kind of crime if you were looking to do so. And so how does the overwhelming expansion of the federal criminal laws now affect ordinary citizens' ability to abide by the law?
When I was U.S. Attorney, I used to tell people that give me a person or a company and give me just any time in their books or in their documents or in their affairs, and I could find a crime that we could apply. That's how confident I was as a prosecutor that the expansion was so robust. And it is no coincidence we have 1 in 3 Americans with a criminal history, whether arrest or conviction, and those two are connected, inextricably connected with the expansion of our criminal laws, and then the failure to rein in any prosecutorial abuse of it.
And I think, Mr.
When they have so many tools at their disposal and the ability to manipulate them, that is what overcriminalization ultimately leads to, is the use of the criminal code for something other than administration of fairness and justice.
What do you see, and maybe from your own work in the criminal justice system, what's the chances of a defendant's recovery when he or she, most often he gets the hammer for low-level drug offense?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's important, critically important, that people understand that we are doing a disservice by lengthening the sentences on what is, in essence, low-level drug cases. And when I tell you that, I have a friend who is a prosecutor for 25 years. I asked him, federal prosecutor, how many kingpins did you get in your 25 years? He said 1. And yet he was applying mandatory minimums to low-level distribution. Why? Because they can. And the philosophy is that if you have the case, you're going to reward your prosecutors if they're being aggressive and they're prosecuting a lot of people. That's how they get pats on the back. And so that's the danger of overcriminalization.
Your time's expired.
There's no question that if we need to take current federal statutes right now and we need to see the overlap. There are ways you can do that through programs that you can run, but we absolutely, as Congress should, and groups, advocacy groups should be looking very closely at the overlaps of these statutes, because many of them can result in adding additional charges when you otherwise wouldn't, because as a prosecutor you wanted to make sure you had all of the potential crimes at issue. And so then you get bloated indictments that have multiple counts in them, when really they should be charged with what the heart of or the essence of the crime is. I would very strongly urge, you've obviously talked about mens rea, everybody understands that passage alone would be the largest Band-Aid until you could deregulate. And so I would then say deregulation, and if you do have, President Trump put in place, if you're gonna pass a regulation, you've got to get rid of 2. And whatever you think about it, that was really good governance. And the Congress forcing the agencies to do that would probably be the most important thing they could do immediately.